This will demonstrate the various ways to find pro-buyer and pro-seller considerations in practical guidance forms and clauses. The Acquisition Agreements task houses acquisition agreements that have been drafted from either a pro-buyer or a pro-seller bias. If an entire form has been drafted with a particular pro-seller or pro-buyer bias, the bias is indicated in the parenthetical. There are two versions of a Delaware Stock Purchase Agreement, one pro-buyer and one pro-seller. The forms also have drafting notes that explain pro-seller, pro-buyer drafting and negotiation points. You can open the drafting notes at the top of the page by clicking Expand All Drafting Notes. This drafting note discusses the definition of knowledge, which is often negotiated in an acquisition agreement. Here, the clause is drafted to favor the buyer. However, in the drafting note, you'll find guidance on both buyer-favorable and seller-favorable drafting approaches. Going back to the Corporate and M&A homepage, you'll find a clause bank in the M&A Provisions task. These clauses are useful to find specific language for a clause you are drafting or marking up in an acquisition agreement. If you need to draft a termination fee, you can find it in Breakup Fees Provisions. These clauses will include guidance in the form summary and drafting notes on the buyer and seller perspectives on highly negotiated clauses. Alternate and optional clauses often give different clause language so that you can choose a different perspective or provide a stronger position for your client. In Corporate and M&A Practical Guidance, the entire form may be drafted and labeled with a buyer or seller bias, and the drafting notes, form summary, and alternate and optional clauses will provide buyer versus seller approaches. Practical Guidance makes it easy to find this crucial information in multiple ways so that you can effectively advocate for your client.